everyone. Thanks for coming. Today we have our guest, Professor Assaf Shwartz, and he'll be talking about relationship between conservation, biodiversity, and urban landscapes. It seems like it's going to be a very interesting talk. Professor Assaf is on sabbatical, you're saying, right? And you're visiting until August. So anyone who after this would like to talk more and don't have a chance to do it today, feel free to reach out as well. It's quite a long talk, so I'm not going to take more time. What's yours?
Good. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and try to kind of summarize my work in the last 10 years, sorry. 10 days to prepare the talk, for the last 10 years to the research. And kind of thinking about where I'm straight now. So this kind of rethinking this whole urban ecology, urban conservation topic, and bring together studies to do in the lab from ecology or from social sciences. So we all know that our appropriation of natural resources have created a huge biodiversity crisis. Goes through. The thing is, we forget sometimes that basically human activity is driving this crisis, and therefore the solution to this crisis are largely depend about our ability to change our behavior and to push our government to act, to do something. The problem is that the same process that threatens biodiversity, such as what we call intensification, urbanization, even our modern lifestyle also change or shift actually the experience of nature and our relationship with nature. This has been termed by Robert Pyle as the extinction of experience. Today, the majority of people live in biologically enriched cities, spend most of the time indoors. You see some anecdotal evidence about the share of children that take part in the US in outdoors activity, reducing the time children spend out, already very low, yes, this per week, less than 40 minutes, it's going down. And look at the study, it's actually the same study, more anecdotal results about changes in activities. Children who never went mountaineering, never went climb trees, fishing, or any kind of nature-related activities. More and more children in Japan are not engaging in those activities, and there are plenty of other of this anecdotal evidence. This is the best study I ever did, or I ever had a chance to participate in which we looked at all the Disney films in 2x214 and explored the nature in the background and a number of animals. And what we saw in this fun study, that nature is going down also culturally. So we have less nature in our Disney films than the scenery, because we have Ratatouille, yes. So it's becoming completely urban. It's Dandy, it's Snow White, when we're going to Ratatouille, both. So we have more and more urban, less nature in the back scene, but also less species. So our children are also exposed less and less to nature. There's not just interaction, physically, direct interaction with nature, also culturally. And the other study done by psychologists about nature in books, literature, songs, and it goes on and on, okay? So we have less and less interaction with nature. Why should we be concerned about all this? We should be concerned about those consequences, because there is a huge research that shows that nature is very important for our well-being and our health, nature interaction, nature experience, and also for our attitudes toward nature conservation, our willingness to protect it, and our behaviors. Remember, we need to change our behavior to protect nature. This is really important for us. And what are the causes? They've been summarized broadly and roughly in two big causes. I mentioned some of them before. The opportunity, so people living in urban areas, less nature, so less opportunity to interact with nature, and orientation, affinity towards nature, emotional connection to nature, stuff that I will talk quite a lot in this talk later on. So if these are the problems, and okay, before I go to the solutions, the urbanization, delete and degrade natural habitats, causing rapid species extinction, disconnecting people from nature or reducing experience of nature. This can have an impact on our health and well-being, but also people are ignorant, people don't experience nature, they don't value it, don't care about it, and it's also kind of a feedback loop to species extinction. If the problem is the lack of nature in cities, so ecologists came up with a very simple solution, urban ecologists, let's enhance biodiversity in cities. Okay, and enhance biodiversity in cities, this is something I did during my master's with Sanit, that's somewhere here. This is the Yarkon Park in Tel Aviv, and put like flower beds all around. Ideally, we can find ways to increase species diversity, and ideally reduce species extinction, health and well-being, connection to nature, amazing, aligning the agenda of public health and conservation. So we have a solution. Great, I can finish now and let's go home and drink more coffee. But that's not so easy, because in 2014 I published a paper looking at this motivation that was raised by Don Deborn and Salit, and show that the evidence doesn't really support. Doesn't support. This doesn't mean there's no evidence. It means that we don't really establish the relationship as we would like them to be. So basically, since then in my urban ecology research, I looked at this framework. Okay? And today what I'm going to take you through each of these arrows and think about them together with some of the studies we did. And I can start with biodiversity or species diversity. And here there is something kind of an interesting trade-off. On one hand, clearly urban areas delete and degrade natural ecosystem and cause species extinction, etc., etc., etc. On the other hand, we know that green spaces, and there's lots of research showing that green spaces can host rich biodiversity, even endangered rare species. This is a very remarkable study here in Australia. I mentioned here, some of you have been part of this study. Green spaces can host very interesting biodiversity, sometimes even that exceeds nearby greener environment. So that's really interesting. And we also know quite a lot of literature about it. We know that we can increase this biodiversity. We can manage these green spaces to increase this. The results of meta-analysis, very nice one. I contributed my data to this one. Shows which kind of factor, management factor, planning factor, connectivity, so landscape factor, which one of these factors can increase biodiversity. We have quite a lot of research. So we know we have ways to increase biodiversity. Sorry, it's here. But others really contribute to the regional species pool, to a more broad picture. And this is the question I was asking myself. And what people did so far was kind of walking along, studying this question along a gradient. This is my study area, some of my study area in Tel Aviv. This is it, I was born in Herzliya. This is the rural area. And there's some kind of urban gradient, which you can find quite a lot in the literature. And what studies have shown that there is either kind of a decreasing trend, or mostly for plants, kind of unimodal, somewhere in the middle, but with species richness kind of peaks. Studies also shown that in terms of community, we can identify 3 groups of species: the one that exploit the urban resources, the human resources, called urban exploiters; the one that manage to adapt and find green spaces, mostly in between; and the one that avoids, not going to enter cities, also adapt. So kind of trend in community composition and kind of find between, of course, the alien invasive species also part of this. The thing with all these studies, of my problem with this, that it's kind of not taking the complexity of urban areas in a backward way. Because this is Tel Aviv again. This is a picture of Tel Aviv. That's how it looks. So typical CBD. If you go further north, this is the gradient. So you expect to find like small detached houses. You get some of them, right? This is Tel Aviv. But you also get like high-rise building. And then you go to my hometown, Herzliya, again. Doesn't really work the way we want it to work, right? It's mixed. It's a mixture. Finally, we get agriculture. Yes, like we expect by the gradient, and this is what you see when you travel in this area. And now, nature reserve, right? No, another city. We're going to get another city, and here are the nature reserves. They are here, kind of scattered in between. So it's not there's no clear gradient, yes, going on. We need to look at these things in a different way. And these are some pictures. What you see again, if you come to this Israel, it's some of those nature reserves around the place I worked in this study. So the PhD of Leo is tackling those questions, trying to understand how similar is the urban and the regional species pool, and trying to understand, looking at alpha and beta diversity. I will focus mostly on alpha diversity today, and see how it varies between city and surrounding, and which variables influence the trends that I will show you later. And for that reason, we did a huge survey. This is the area, the metropolis of Tel Aviv, one of the biggest, very dense metropolis in the world, not the biggest, densiest. And this area I showed before, we attached a few green areas to increase the region, nature reserve in the south. Altogether, we sampled 300 square kilometers. We did a systematic survey. What we did is we divided the whole area to grids of 100 square meters and randomly selected 8%. So it's huge survey, 2,266 nodes. It looks like this. So basically everything is covered, really covered. It was an intensive 4 birders for 2 years, traveling around. 2 visits per site. So 1 breeding season we did again the second breeding season, and 10-minute point count. And we also got some really nice, very detailed land cover, building cover height, vegetation height, information which we are able to classify. Again, in this study, classify urban, open areas, open area agriculture, build up, and the blue here represent throughout this presentation the urban green spaces. And when you look at the results, kind of look at the species, we did this analysis with altogether 182 bird species. And for this analysis, we only did use 123 species that had more than 5 individuals, so not the very rare ones. And what you see in the most important thing that about 80% of the species occur in all the habitats, in the build, in the urban, in the open. So quite a big of overlap. So we have potential. Only said we have quite a nice, quite a bit of overlap between the habitat. If it goes even higher if you take a look at the build and the urban together. But let's leave it for now. In terms of species richness, this came as a surprise. The highest species richness was found in urban green spaces. So there are more biodiverse than natural places in Israel, the open protected areas, the agriculture, and the built area which over the grass. Any idea why this happens?
More niches available?
Niches, intensive agriculture, but something else. It's diversity, Shannon diversity and Simpson show similar input abundance sign, even as you get them still high, not very different. What's really interesting here is that we looked at synanthropic species. So those urban exploiters, okay, the crow, the pigeon, but also a lot of invasive species. Like here in Australia, we have a big problem with common myna, which is probably the most abundant species today. 1997, there was no mynas. Now it's the most abundant species in our area. So these synanthropic species really flourish again in urban areas. And when you take those out, you will get the trend you would expect. Yeah? So protected areas and the open areas agriculture are higher than the intermediate green spaces, and last the urban, the built areas. That's a trend I would expect from the literature. So for now, we focus just on those species because okay, we don't really want to help the crows and the invasive species. We want to help those more native species, more native urban adapters. And we looked in a set of models about the variables that helps, and I'll just go through very, very quickly. We don't have time to dive into this. So inland water was important positively. Trees had a positive effect. Low vegetation, not just trees, also low vegetation. You need to remember that in Israel, we don't have a rainforest or eucalyptus forest. Most of the vegetation is small, and a key or even smaller than that. So low vegetation really important. And this I will jump. We also look at species assemblages using a GDM. I don't want to get into it, but I do want to say here, and at least for birds, that was kind of interesting, is that connectivity wasn't that important. So we look in our models of different levels of connectivity, and we tried various ways to measure connectivity. It didn't have an influence. So for birds, at least, they can fly between the buildings, they can fly from tree to tree, and that was for most. Yeah, we did analysis for this 100 something birds, 102 I think birds. For most species, connectivity, the landscape connectivity didn't really have an effect. At least in our context, was quite fine. So if I want to summarize what I've showed you so far, so we see that most species do not avoid the city, okay, and they spend there. We see there is a high diversity in green areas in the city, but remember that large part of this country is some invasive and urban exploiters contribute this diversity. Something which I have to mention is that we didn't look, and most studies in urban ecology do not look on the population viability. So we keep on looking on counting species, but there is a need to see how well those native species are doing in urban areas and which factor drive those, but still, instead for a while in urban ecology, still people don't do it because it's very complicated and costly. And what's kind of a bit promising is that basically the habitat quality is more important than the landscape context, at least for birds. In our context, we also have the same database for plants, which we haven't analyzed yet. So we have a huge database still last week we finished finally the survey. And this means that without replanning cities, just by managing the habitat, the patches, we can increase biodiversity. And there are several studies showing this. The question I'm asking now is, okay, so we can, put more species into our cities, make them more biodiverse. how it's going to mitigate the consequence of the extinction experience, how it's going to impact people. And that's going to be the most of my talk today. So going back to this model and saying that this is, again, the model opportunity, orientation, experience, influence the experience of nature and all the consequences. I would say that all this model of the extinction of experience, it's something Rich and I have been talking, is leaning on very circumstantial evidence. So it's kind of study here, study there, not too many studies that really looked at it properly, because the way to look at it properly is to go back in time, yes, and to see what happened 50 years ago, 20 years ago, and only one study managed to do that, and this was published by Rachel, Owen, and Rich here, and other colleagues. And when they look in Singapore about measures of frequency and duration of visit, they found no changes. When between 1996 and 2018, they found no differences in connection to nature. So nothing really changed in Singapore. We can talk about it later. It's interesting, but it was not supporting. The only study that was looking at supported properly didn't find supportive result. Did find something which I want to flag. It's really important. They found that there was no relation. Basically, interaction from far away, like looking at a bird from far away, or a snail or a tree, didn't change. But interaction close, when people get closer to nature, kind of going down. Yes, I think it's something important I want to flag because it's actually going to relate later to some of my results. So yeah, we cannot go back in time. Yes, to study this, I'm trying, keep on trying, didn't manage to do that. So what we do in ecology, we don't have that. We look at spatial comparison. Yes, so what we did in Israel, looking at people at rural areas and urban areas and compare them. We had to kind of look at the extinction of experience, and we checked whether connection to nature, emotional connection to nature, which we measure in most of all the studies here using the NR6. It's a measure of nature relatedness and ecological knowledge or species identification skills. We asked people to identify 12 very, very common species across Israel, some non-native, native, that you can see here in the picture, and check how people, which kind of species people know. So we asked them first, so it's important. We asked them first, do they know the species? And then if they're able to name the species. So a different level of knowledge that we studied. So the first thing, as expected, people living in rural areas are more connected to nature compared to people living in urban areas. Okay, the higher score of nature connection. A number of correct answers. So these people managed to identify 6 species compared to something like 2 in urban areas. And since then, we repeated it in different places, and the study itself also takes data from France and from England and make altogether it's kind of systematic this pattern. Interesting is that when asked people how many species they think they know, so urban people think they know 8 species. Okay, actually they know 2. And rural people think they know 8. Maybe they do know them, but they don't know to name them and manage to name 6. So there's kind of a mismatch. Yes, so urban people are really confident the way they. Yeah, but the thing is, to talk about it later. We did something similar again. So again, because we cannot go back in time, we're doing spatial comparisons. And here we did a survey just in Tel Aviv. So again, the center of the map I showed you before. This study led by Agat, a postdoc of mine, used to be. And here we did a survey of 523 people in gray, green, and moderated green neighborhoods that you see here with the colors. And we basically tried to, for the first time, look at the whole model. Look at the whole model together. So checking the extinction experience of the experience of nature during childhood, how close people lived into green spaces, opportunity, how close they live today. This is the perceived one, and this is an objective one. Yes, what's the NDVI, average NDVI in the area, the number of trees, open areas, and these are really something we measured using GIS. Orientation, again, the nature relatedness scale, how they're affinity to nature. How frequent, duration, how many times visit the green spaces, and for how long, and the bunch of measures for health, well-being, attitudes, and behaviors. Yes, so we did pro-environmental behavior because conservation behavior is something which is still challenging to study. And this is the results. I think they're quite interesting. First of all, you see that childhood experience influence the opportunity. So people probably that have more nature in their childhood prefer to live in more green area, but it's only the perceived, yes, what they perceive. The objective one is not related to anything. So it's what's really important where people perceive, so how they perceive, how far, the question was how far do you live from an urban park, for instance, yes? Really how far do you live from work didn't have any effect. And this opportunity had, as expected, because a lot of that is showing this opportunity has related to health and well-being. all the measures together. When you look at the nature experience, it didn't went through nature experience as we expected. Nature, or as the model actually expected. Yes, from here to nature experience, and then from nature experience, you find a direct relation to well-being and to behaviors, pro-environmental behaviors. And most important and interesting is that the orientation, so the emotional connection to nature you see here, was related to experience of nature and directly to attitudes, but also this relation was mediated by experience of nature. So experience of nature actually mediate this relation, and showing for the first time that this orientation is really interesting variable, touching a bunch of things around here. So remember this, we did the same survey during COVID. And during COVID, there was no experience. During the lockdown, people couldn't get out, so there's no experience of nature. Not there. There's no relationship because people did not experience nature, right? This is quite expected, but the opportunity again becoming very important with everything. So where people, how close people live, was related, and the orientation remains very important. Yes. So during the COVID, it was an interesting experiment, and we repeated the same analysis with the same people, by the way. So exactly the same people, and compare. And this is the first time somebody checked all this modeling. So another question we wanted to ask ourselves, right, is how spending time outside, no, just spending time outside, influence people. And we want to find people who spend more time outside. Do you have any idea how we can find people who spend more time outside easily in a survey without making too much effort? But we thought about something. People who have pets, right? Because if you have a pet, you have a dog. Normally you get out, spend more time outside. And ideally, if you spend more time outside, you go out to the park, you go out to the street, and then you interact more with nature, and this could influence everything we just spoke about. If you have a cat, you are kind of similar connected to nature, but you don't have to take your cat outside. I don't know, people here take the cat outside, or no? I've seen a few people already. So I want to see how those people who have dogs take the cat, what they're doing. And we did it in France, Israel, and UK, and did a big survey. Using market-based, first we confirmed that people who are having dogs are spending more time outside, they go to more diverse places, etc., etc. But then when you look at the model, it wasn't exactly what we expected it to be. We checked again ecological knowledge, nature relatedness, environmental attitudes. And here it's, so we find a correlation between nature, experience of nature, and the duration and time people spend outside, and nature relatedness, but it's really hard to determine what's the direction. Whether people who have dogs are more connected to nature and therefore they go, so what's the directionality is hard to determine. We did find a relation between nature relatedness and ecological knowledge and environmental attitudes, and also ecological knowledge and environmental attitudes. So again, these variables of emotional connected to nature is repeatedly coming significant in our studies. Also, we did find that Israel was the worst ever in between the three countries, like Israel, in all the variables we measure. So nature experience people in Israel spend less time in nature and less time and less frequently, followed by the UK and then France. Surprising, sorry, some people. Nature relatedness was strongest in France compared to the other countries. Ecological knowledge was highest in the UK, and environmental attitude was stronger in France. Again, some of this was a bit surprising, but that was the survey we did. We tried to do something else to measure, to tease apart and look at people who adopt the dog. We did an experiment with that, but it didn't work. So let's move on. I think why I think this super dogs so important, because people are going outside today. They're spending time in nature, but in fact they're not. You know, they're like this. Yeah, and we're all like this. Yes. So looking, answering emails with the dog, like this woman going around. And I think this made us think that we should not just focus on the time, the quantity of nature experience, but actually the quality. And Miles Richardson called it moments and not minutes. And I love this phrase. You need to think about those moments, not about just minutes, just the time people spend outside. Because one experience of this is the Gazelle Valley in Jerusalem. One experience of the gazelle from this distance, it's something huge. I see it with my kids. Yeah, it's much more important than hours with the dog. Yes, I have a dog, so I know how it works. Again, does biodiversity matters here? And I'll keep it open at this stage. I'm not going to answer this later on. Again, what I want to summarize from what I've shown you so far, the affinity to nature, orientation, all these variables, different names to call it, relation to nature, is basically very important for well-being, conservation, ecology, everything. So it's becoming a variable, it's becoming really pivotal. Our emotional connection to nature actually determines the way we will behave, etc. And so then we will start thinking about how can we enhance or work with this connection to nature. And we thought that the first way to do that is maybe try and promote meaningful interaction with nature. So not just time, just help people to interact more with nature during the time, they spend outside. And this is again, a study, an experiment done by Agat. We went in the campus at the Technion where I work. We had 303 students, and we asked them to walk for 30 minutes outside without entering any building. It's a hill, so we dropped on the top of the hill, asked them to come back to the lab. 30 minutes, please, the only instruction, don't enter to a building. However, we have different conditions for different groups. For some of them, we have no instructions to do whatever you want. Some of them, we ask them to observe wildlife, smell flowers, listen to sounds, take picture, turn off your phone, explore as many areas as possible, diversity, touch nature elements, and just walk slow. Now, we then, okay, I'll tell you in 1 second, we studied the nature interaction. So for instance, the last question, did you see a bird, smell a flower? And we had like 36 questions, this kind of nature interaction, yes, no, and we did a richness, how many interaction people had altogether, and we looked at the positive affect, of how good they felt at the end of the walk, positive and negative affect at the end of the walk, measured called panas. I'll want to stop for 1 second, ask you, what do you think from all these cues, we call it cues to experience, which one will strengthen interaction with nature?
Walk more slowly.
Walk more slowly. Phone. And take pictures. So, no. This what, but so normally our results so intuitive. This is completely counterintuitive. This is the control. This is the total number of nature behaviors. How many times you saw a bird, touch a flower, like a list of 36 list of different behaviors. That's the control, so people will not ask. And the one that really worked is smell flowers and touch natural elements. Now, what about these two? These two behaviors force you to get really, really close, right? You need to break a distance, psychological distance, you get close. As soon as you get close, you observe, you watch, you're in a different mood. These are psychologists working with us really like this. It's really breaking the psychological distance. And this is see, then of course the observer take picture where somewhere in the middle, listen to sounds, not significant, but again in the middle, and then you have those ones and walk slower, even though we thought it would do that. Completely the opposite. Students don't really want to walk slow, don't tell them to walk slow. Generally, don't people what not to do, tell them what to do. You're coming, don't, I'm not really happy. And turn off your phone, it went down. It not only went down, because we also looked at negative feelings. Negative feelings went up, yes, because what happened now? People are closing the phone, they're in stress because they're going to miss something. Yeah? The last thing they want to do is to look at the bird or interact with a butterfly or whatever. They don't care about it anymore. Because now they're thinking all the time, what am I missing in Facebook or Twitter or something like that? What was also nice, so turn off the phone, opposite way. What's also nice is, again, here we did the other mediation analysis, and what we saw is that the positive affect, there was no direct relation between the cues we did to positive feeling at the end of the walk, but we did show that that nature interaction was mediating the relationship. So more that people interacted, more they did nature interacted, they felt better. So people who are, what I'm trying to say is people who touch and smell, to a lesser extent, took picture and observe, actually felt also better. So this is great, yes? They're feeling better, aligning the agenda, they're interacting more with nature. Great. And what's the time now? So another study, similar, I will rush a little bit. I'm not going to tell you more about it, but just quickly to mention it. I'm working now the Faculty of Architecture with designers, with industrial designer, and we're thinking about how can we design for interaction with nature. What you see here is the tube, which is connected to the ground, supposedly to a porcupine barrel. Not really. And then kids, because there is a barrel not very far, people can see the entrance to the barrel. It's kind of placed in a way that you can think it will go all the way down, doesn't go all the way, not want to bother the porcupine. So the kids are kind of listening, and because of the wind, there is sounds. And they're like, wow, we can hear the porcupine. They get really, really excited. This is all this idea that of me, the master student in my lab, is doing this different type of interaction with nature. This is here, did like a scent table, and we had two trays. This is inside the nature reserve. One tray was interactive, so you have a sign and a kind of something activity, take off your shoes, walk barefoot, etc. And the other one was just sign, just putting sign with information in Hebrew about nature and I don't want to get close to all of this, but in general we show that the interactive ones, as you probably expected, interactive one, which is this one, was higher. So it connected, people did more nature interaction. So they interacted more with nature in different ways, not just the way we asked them to do, in different ways, more than the other groups of informative and the control. What we did not find, and maybe not surprising, that was no really difference in measures of well-being. So it didn't really influence the well-being. So this is kind of small, why in nature you feel better. Doesn't matter if you listen to a porcupine or don't listen to a porcupine. It's kind of already had an effect on you. And it didn't, this is what this study showed. But it also showed that this in design, in design, you can actually enhance the interaction of nature. So we can go out there and enhance it. For me, it's the most opportunity. So far, people in urban ecology focus on biodiversity and enhancing the biodiversity, but I think we should think about enhancing nature interaction. And of course, we're going to get positive affect, well-being. It can strengthen the connection of nature. Still, if we do something, if you increase the interaction of nature, we still have to study this hypothesis. How this biodiversity, it's still keeping the same question open, how does biodiversity going to influence connection to nature? Do we need biodiversity, so diversity, or should we need something different? There is a reason, there is a question mark, because I don't know. It's part of the reason I came here, so we're going to explore this more. But I don't really know the answer. But I do have, last thing I want to present today is to talk about how this biodiversity relates to well-being. So can we, by increasing biodiversity in cities, align the agenda again of public health and conservation? And we expect that yes. Why? Because there is huge literature, as I said before, that green and nature increase health and well-being. So completely, the hypothesis was, and there's a similar paper led by Rich 15, 16, 17 years ago, 2007. Yes, many years ago. Many years ago, that actually showed that it actually worked. That was the first paper, and we wanted to do that. Maybe a bit of an overview, but how this all field is look. What might it consider? Because it's been studied quite a lot. So the relationship with biodiversity well-being is mostly studied by large-scale studies that look at people where they live and look at some measures of nature, and basically look at biodiversity indicator, physical and mental health measures, basically around people's home. I think these kind of studies find a consistent result that nature and green component provide well-being, but not necessarily biodiversity. So nature and green, yes, biodiversity, sometimes. There are other studies looking at biodiversity species appreciation, how people perceive and appreciate a species or biodiversity. And this study shows that people notice and appreciate plant diversity. So there's quite a lot of research about plants. It's actually working with plants. When you go to high diversity, like above 16 species, people don't really see the difference. So 16, that's fine. 20, yeah, but above 20, it's the same for people. Also for animals, it's not so simple. Yes, stuff that moves, people don't really notice and see them. And there is this study I mentioned. First one was led by Rich in biodiversity and subjective well-being. These studies explore the relationship between observed and perceived species richness, mostly birds, plants, and butterflies, and subjective well-being, the variables like reflection, attachment, etc. And these studies show inconsistent results. Sometimes it works in some contexts, sometimes it doesn't work. So it's really inconsistent. Sometimes people notice biodiversity and there is a correlation between the real biodiversity and the perceived biodiversity. Sometimes there is no correlation. And most of these studies were done in England, Australia, Anglo-Saxon cultures. Last, there is very, very few experimental studies that manipulated biodiversity and explore what happened to people, and again, inconsistent results. So the relationship between biodiversity and well-being is inconsistent, and we wanted to expand this to Israel and understand how biodiversity relates to subjective well-being, replicate some studies that were done in the UK, and also expand a little bit and explore how nature-relatedness and knowledge, ecological knowledge, moderate the relationship. Because we already understood that this is an important factors. This is what we did. This is now a city of Netanya. Remember the city in the gradient after it was a nature reserve, and then it was a city. That's the city. Yeah? That's instead of the nature reserve, it's Netanya. And we looked at small public gardens. We sampled birds, butterfly, and plants in 2015, and we did a survey. Again, subjective well-being following work of Rich, nature relatedness, perceived species interest, how many species people perceive to have, social demographic variable, and ecological knowledge, and as I explained to you before, with those species. And what we found? We found that people underestimated biodiversity and that perceived and sample richness were not correlated. We found that subjective well-being and and perceived and sampled, found the subjective, never mind, subjective and perceived, they found that subjective well-being did not directly correlate with perceived and sampled biodiversity. It did, however, strongly correlate with garden area, so people get more well-being benefit from larger gardens. This is very consistent. Yes, larger green spaces provide more well-being benefits. Ecological knowledge moderated three relationships. Now you have to follow me a little bit. So this is actually the relationship for butterflies and for bird abundance. This is less interesting, I think, but more interesting is that people with high ecological knowledge, when they perceive the garden to be richer, they benefited more from the garden. And this kind of varied for people with medium and with low biodiversity. But what's more important, this kind of complex slide, we find that nature relatedness, again, emotional connection to nature, moderated the relationship between, again, well-being measured on the right axis. These are not all the relations. Different taxonomic group, sometimes perceived, sometimes sampled, somewhere sampled. This woody cover, and put the sample one. And again, people who are connected to nature, when they visit a more biodiverse garden, they kind of gain more benefits. But those who are not connected to nature, it's not such a big part of the population, only 8%. It's kind of even the opposite way around. It's actually going negative. More biodiverse, they don't really enjoy it, they actually suffer, or they don't benefit from the garden. And the majority of the population is kind of flat in the middle, yes? Sometimes it's dependent about the variables. And for bird abundance, we get something completely different, which I don't have time to get into, but I think this is because of a lot of these kind of pigeons, tropic species, that people who are connected to nature, when there is huge abundance, they don't like it. They benefit less from the garden. And I think this is because when you have high abundance, mostly pigeons, sparrows, and stuff like that, that some people don't like. So if you like to start and summarize altogether everything, the biodiversity and well-being is not as straightforward as what we would like to argue, and we should not assume that biodiversity is equal well-being, and one size doesn't fit all. So something can work for some people, cannot work for other group of people. We need to really think about how we design inclusive experiences, and not just for people of nature level like ours. There's other people that we need to go with, especially those people who want to connect to nature, not people like us. The other thing that there is quite an assumption that nature is some kind of panacea, that biodiversity equals well-being, equals of services, attitude, but we're going to put nature, we're going to put biodiversity, it's going to work. And the bad news, no, it's not so simple. Nature is not a panacea. If you're going to put nature, you need to be much smarter. Think for a second, what do you really want? Is it well-being, is biodiversity? Because it's going to be different. Yes, it's going to be different for different objectives. And I think we need to remember that nature has its intrinsic value, and kind of talking about all the service all the time, but nature has its own value, regardless of everything else we want to plan for. But in cities, humans are the keystone species. Okay, they are the main species, they are main key stakeholder, and therefore, if I had to invest tomorrow morning $1 million in urban ecology, I will work on this. I will work about connecting people to nature less than increasing biodiversity. So maybe this can be part of it, but I will focus on connecting people to nature. So we need to, again, try and develop more mechanistic understanding about which components of the, what is the thing that can connect people to nature? It's a big question, and everything I showed you today is oriented to kind of developed countries, Israel, UK, Australia, these studies around here. We know much less in developing countries, in Asia, in Africa, and we do need to study this question there. I'm very keen for collaboration towards that regard. Identify the synergies and trade-off. And I think we should move away. This is kind of the results from one size fits all to more towards optimization, more towards optimization approach. And this is what we do today in the lab. This is an eye tracking experiment we did. So put this eye tracker, very sophisticated gadget that doesn't really work well, to be honest. And people walk around with those eye tracking, you can see what kind of elements are looking at. And then you can relate the elements are looking at, those components, that is not diversity. Yes, the lawn, there's a car, there's a bush, and we can identify those elements and try and see how different elements relate to well-being. In this experiment led by Whitney, another postdoc in my lab, we looked at this and we did a measure of various measures of before-after experiment. And in general, different people walked in a trail that they stopped. They asked to stop. Mindfulness mindfulness walks. We walk towards the university, and then stop in front of a building or in front of a green space, and then we record the movie. Because if you cannot do that, you cannot really analyze the movie so easily. Anyway, if people want to talk about eye tracking, I can give you a pitch. Why not use it for an hour or so? It's very, very promising, but very complicated to use and a lot of time. But we did find some interesting results. So with stress, so people looked more at trees, more at bushes to lesser extent and lawns. People didn't have too much flower in their walk. Actually restored better from stress, or were less stressful and less stressed at the end of the walk. So it's kind of working. So it's components, and you can try and tease apart this component, just a bit complicated. And the optimization is what we're doing today, and it's kind of inspired a bit about the work that you're doing here. A few, again, not assuming on benefit, measuring this, you've seen part of this work, trying to make this using species distribution models to make this huge map of distribution of birds in the whole district, and looking at using experiments and also surveys to use well-being components, relations, and then putting all this together to understand trade-offs and synergies, but also, not really Marxen, but some version of Marxen, also to kind of come up with a tool for planners, how to make decisions. If you want to build, if you want to design you have some money, what are you going to do? Are you going to, how you only design money, your objective is from interest to reduce runoff. How are you going to do it in a way which also optimize the solution for birds and for well-being and for other equity or other stuff like that. So this stuff we're working on, we start working today. We're just collecting at the moment, we're doing this kind of data. It's a lot of data collection. You've seen part of it before. That's it. So thank you very much. Thank you for everybody who worked on these projects and my collaborator. And it's really a pleasure to be here so far. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions? Or maybe from online as well, Kate?
Not yet. Some compliments.
Yes.
Yeah, very, very interesting talk. I guess not being familiar with this type of research, I don't understand why we would think that biodiversity would be the link, to be honest with you, because whether you have 3 species or whether you have 6 species, you know, if a person is not familiar with the trade-offs of having 2 species versus 3 species versus, you know, a cathedral forest in in Western North America that has huge trees, but it's just 1 species of trees, but it's much more overwhelming than, so what has been the reason for sort of all this catch-all sort of biodiversity is important?
So again, I think this is led by ecologists, yes?
Yeah.
So it's a lot about ecologists moving to social sciences, like me and like Rich. And I think what the idea was trying to align the agenda of public health and conservation. If we could have shown that biodiversity is good for people, then it's a good reason to enhance biodiversity in cities and elsewhere.
Sure.
Okay. Unfortunately, so that's why a lot of effort went to that direction. Today, I completely agree with you. I completely think that after doing several of those studies, looking at biodiversity, I'm convinced that we should look at it differently. And the way I'm looking at it today is by components of nature, which I start talking about, bushes, trees, but also by traits. You mentioned, when you look at ecosystem or species traits, and this is something we talked to Kalina before, looking at traits is very interesting, again, ecosystem traits, because people don't really care, I think, about diversity we care about, but they do care about, like it's unique. Like to see a whale, it's unique, right? You don't see a whale, and that's big, or big, yes, or size. So I think you should start looking about the interaction of traits, like ecologists also did, moving from diversity, biodiversity, also trait diversity. There is also parallel process there. I'm not sure this, but it's
I'm just wondering if we're overcomplicating it, right? And to me, the garden area is a classic, perhaps, like, so a person arrives and has this massive garden, right? It could be a lawn and roses, 2 species. You know, versus a small square that has, 50 species. Maybe we need to sort of step back and sort of simplify how we think the person who's not familiar with biodiversity and trait even, importance of those aspects. So they won't think about it.
I want to look at the other side now. Put the hat of somebody in the faculty of architecture. The people are good people, students there, and they want to design buildings, they want to design landscapes, and they want to design things. And we're coming to them and say nature is good. They say, okay, good. What is nature? You ask people what's nature, lawns and some trees, the beach, right? It's very simple. Yeah. So maybe it's true. Maybe unfortunately that's society we're living in today. Lawns, some trees, that's nature. Or maybe there's other stuff in nature that's good, and we can look at it like diversity of colors, etc. And I think we need this type of research to inform. Yeah, because most psychologists stopped in nature or green. They stopped there. But this is not very useful for us to promote our agenda, and also for them to do something which is, like win-win solution.
Question. How did you measure ecological knowledge in your research?
So in the study that I present today, I showed a picture of 12 species, and people had to first say whether they know them or not, and then identify them. And each correct answer was marked as 1 point. So it's between 0 and 12 points. So basically, it's not really ecological knowledge. It's more like species identification skills.
Yeah. The reason why I'm asking this is because, like, I'm from Indonesia, and all what you're said here is really interesting, but it seems like there's a gap that's missing between how to appreciate nature, as in leaving it where it's supposed to be, conservation and such. They have everything, they have that interest, they want to protect, they want the connection. But because there's that gap, it feels like it's misinterpreted, and all that they want for well-being, they take it from nature, and then they keep it within themselves.
Yeah.
And this is often pets or plants as well. And when I ask them, they would say, oh, there's a lot that's going on. They don't know what's going on in the forest. They haven't been there themselves. But they've seen from many sources of information that it's destruction. And they've seen like, oh, it's getting cut down, it's deforestation. Rather than these pets, well, they call it pets, but rather than these wildlife being there outside living and being sad and having no food, I'm going to take them home. They're going to live with me. They're going to stay with me. We're going to be happy. And that's my part of conserving nature. So that's kind of something that I find really interesting. And my question would probably be like, you're mentioning ecological knowledge, but I think that's where that gap is, because people that think that these animals are being saved and they have that interaction and well-being is being kept in a place that they're fed and well and such, but they're not really being in their habitat. That means maybe they're lacking that ecological knowledge. So that's kind of why I asked, how did you measure that, and whether that was, because it seems like everything's there. It's just kind of been twisted in a different way. And I think there's obviously other aspects of culture and such.
First of all, I'm not familiar with the situation in Indonesia, and but I would say if this situation is that people are taking species to protect them home, this is great. I'm sorry, this is really great. No, this is really good start.
Yeah.
Because they care. And what I'm concerned about, people don't care. If they care and they're doing the wrong thing, that's the best. Because just need to explain to them what they can do better. Yes, this is. I'm more concerned about people don't really care and take a pet because they want to hear the beautiful, in Israel at least, when people put birds in the book, it's mostly in Arab minorities in Israel, and they like it. They like the sounds. They like the sound of the bird. It's really important for them. So they enjoy to wake up with the beautiful sound of a bird next to the window. They don't care about nature, and they're destroying nature in the process. Yes. But they want, so this is something really tough to deal with. But if this is the basis, so we're on the same basis, then the big question is how, I heard this word, educate. How do you convey a message? How do you convey the message? How you talk, how you explain the connection, make the relation between a behavior, and this is something which I haven't studied, but there is research about it, and it's very interesting, but this is a good start. I wonder if that's the case. I wonder if people are taking it just because they want to protect nature, or taking it because, again, for their own benefit or fun. And I keep on thinking about the fact that maybe people want to still want to control nature. I don't know if it's innate. I wonder if why every time I see a tiger, I want to pet it, like my daughter, the koala here. She just want to pet the koala. That's everything. That's just what she wants to do, right? Why? Why do you want to have this kind of feeling of I want to touch? Why need to touch a koala? Why I'm doing bird ringing, and we're ringing birds, and I'm really enjoying this. Yes, I'm taking the bird, I'm releasing them, and why I'm enjoying this? Why cannot just with my binocular look at the bird without bothering the bird? Okay, we're doing it for research. The one I will show you next talk is not this one. But why I'm enjoying this? I don't know. I'm just so I really wonder about these questions. Why people put cage birds? Why they want to make their cage birds? Is it a connection to nature? Is it protection to nature? It's really good question that should be studied completely.
I didn't get past, I think, the second slide that you put up, which was the graph that showed how much time people were spending outdoors. Is that, and all I could come up with is, you must have a really specific definition of outdoors, because I was trying to save humanity in my brain, like, there must be some reason for why it's 20 minutes a week. Because if it's not like a really closely defined thing as to what outdoors are, then like we're fucked. Sorry, but so my question, how is outdoors defined in that graph?
So this is not my research. I think I mentioned later on. This is a paper by Soga and Kevin Gaston, Soga and Gaston in 2016, which is a sentimental paper in this field. And what they did, two kind of surveys. So what they did, kind of meta-analysis, two kind of surveys from different locations and made these graphs. There is no really information about what was measured exactly. And if later on I said everything is circumstantial, because I also don't really understand what was tested in those surveys, how they were tested. So I would put you have a bunch of those circumstantial evidence. There is definitely a trend. I don't know what was studied, etc. It's not proper. The only proper study I've seen that looked at before, after, with a pure methodology that you can understand and criticize, Rachel and Rich. So other than that, it's all kind of bunch of those surveys that done in Japan and done this, and I don't know who that did it. Yeah, I tried to track back how, like you, I tried to understand. I didn't manage to get really to understand fully the details. So but I think I do think there is a trend. I think we do have a trend of this thing, but again, it's something we're talking about. If you go back in history, way back, 100 years ago, children from the age of 14 in Europe, or even earlier, that were working. 15, I don't know, I'm not sure with not good with my history. So, and people worked really. So today I'm able to go to Fraser Island, right, and see whales and dolphins. Who that lived in Israel could have imagine seeing a dolphin or a whale, whatever, 50 years ago. So in one hand, we're losing on regular nature interaction. The other hand, we have opportunity to take our car and drive to beautiful waterfall that people couldn't do like 50 years ago. So I think there is something, this assumption, and there's something, again, we're talking all the time, this extinction of experience hypothesis, it's more complex than this kind of simple graphs. And to be honest, I don't think we really need it anymore. I think we made the case, we need nature. Maybe you should move on to something else, but I don't know what's something else. So that's I'm working here with Rich, so we don't have good ideas yet. Sorry.
You said briefly the levels of connectivity didn't affect the birds. Obviously, they can fly. Do you know what that trend is for other species that can't fly?
No, and we're working. So I'm just saying in my next talk, I'm promoting doing it. In my next talk, we're doing animal movement in agriculture. We have a beautiful system of tracking animals in every second, like every second or 4 seconds. And I will talk about in agriculture. And there you'll see that birds do not cross a field of wheat of 200 meters. So come to next talk. but this is so. But in cities, what we've seen now, and this is a different way. Here we look at community composition and question like that, and check whether the composition are different and distance and different type of model, resistant matrices, etc. For birds, we saw no impact. And when I try to look at the cities, look at the data and trying to see, you really have almost like a tree. Every 20 meters, 30 meters, you have a tree. So you can really look at this as like a stepping stone and move in the city.
So they don't really need a corridor.
At least, again, for what we've seen here in the cities, no. Again, the proper way to do it is to do movement research, which in this case is very complicated. I know some studies that look at there are not too many movement studies inside urban areas. I've looked at it once. It's a bit about bats. It's complicated. The reception, it's impossible to follow species, but there are in the community there are several studies that show that corridors are important for some species. Yes, even for birds. The studies show that. We didn't find this. And because we didn't find it, we have a postdoc just working now on this topic and doing very complicated stuff I cannot even explain now. This paper is Young Engler, and he's doing a lot of connectivity measures, and still everything he's trying to do, nodes analysis, and this, nothing works. So nothing become really important. So this is what we have at the moment. But other studies did show that connectivity, yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on like the fact that the experience changed the most when people are told to touch nature. Like, and I think about like the way I was as a child and like the physical experience, like catching frogs. Right? If I wanted my son to go out and be able to catch a frog, I honestly don't know where he could from now. And it's only like 30 years. So this idea about like shifting baseline and how much you can, you know, experience literally with your hands. Do you think that that is something that you can kind of moderate? Do you think that's important in terms of thinking about what our children are doing now? Or do you think it's just like we're getting to the point where you've got to look but don't touch because some of these systems are getting so vulnerable?
No, I completely with the touching. And it's also when you work in nature reserve in Israel. So I have another master's, a PhD student working on nature experience in nature. And she found that the way the plan nature reserve in Israel is don't touch, like a museum. Don't touch, don't step, don't ever touch, don't ever pick up a flower, nothing. You cannot, you all the time have to be like this, yes? And we're talking about a nature reserve that like only 20 or 10% is open for people, even less with a trail. Yeah? So most of nature reserve is open for nature, and the part that's a small part open for people. People have to be really careful. They can get fined if they just pick up a flower. Yes. So and what she found is that managers and everything they do, the manager and landscape architects working on this nature reserve, is to restrict touching, restrict interaction. So put barriers. No, yeah, this is nature and us. Yes. Think about also, you can go philosophy more. You think about the beginning of nature reserve, Yellowstone. Yes. What was the nature reserve? They're taking a Yellowstone and saying this the Indians living there, taking them out because they're not part of nature. Yes, and this is them, this is us, this is nature, and now we can walk on the trail and don't touch. So we also I think that completely this is part of the problem, that also in our interaction with real deep interaction with nature, we don't really allow ourselves to immerse, to interact with nature. I completely think that this is what we need to do, especially in urban areas where there's a beautiful paper by Ingo Kuwarik group in Berlin, and they look at people who pick flowers and berries and stuff and quantify the impacts. Okay, look at the well-being, and these people are very happy. They're really liking the interaction. It's much more connected to nature, blah, 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 all the things I've showed here. But they also show that they don't really pick up something which is endangered or anything. They pick up the common species and they say that doesn't really, ecologically, doesn't really matter. So in the cities, I will not advocate for that in nature reserve, but in the cities completely. And I think we should tell our kids to take off the shoes, walk barefoot, touch, explore. My son was bitten by last 2 weeks ago by not bitten, like a crab. He touched everything, yes. So, but yes, he touched everything, and then he gets sometimes some pain. Okay, that's fine. But he really enjoyed this. And in my PhD, I did an experiment in which people interacted with nature, and we gave this kind of activity days. And we had a sand tables, and children were asked to design gardens. It's kind of a game, part of the activity nature day in Paris, inside Paris. And after that, we had interviews with people and questionnaires, etc. And all the parents said that was the most amazing thing they had in the day. So we did a lot of activities. So the fact that children could touch the sand, touch the ground, touch leaves, touch acorns, and build and touch physically, that was the best experience for them in the whole day, with lots of different activities we organized. So I think there is a need for this to maintain this nature connection, but this needs to be studied.
So then you can online today.
Not today,
Not
just compliments.
Good.
Well, time is at 1.
Thank you.
It's 12. Thank you so much. Feel free to ask if there are any burning questions left,
I'm
or
around until August.
yes, and your email. I see you have a UQ email as well.
No, don't.
That one first.
I have my institute were cyber attack, and since then I'm in a mess. Yeah, I should check my email. It's a Gmail It's a similar gmail.com. I've almost no access to my Technion, but I need this email. So every time I access my UQ, it's blocking my university. So
Okay.
I'm in a mess for about 2 months now with no emails. You can imagine that having no emails for 2 months. It's really
Fantastic.
my students are shifting. Yeah, my students are at a shift to send me all the emails every day. Somebody else is forwarding me all the emails. So I think
SH Schwartz
so Schwartz say
Schwartz
at gmail.com.
at gmail.com.
Yes, at gmail.com. I'm here at 5:36. Yes, 5:36. Feel free. Knock on the door. Thank you. So